FBI briefers told the committee that the Bureau's Foreign Influence Task Force investigates the exact kind of activity that has come to light about Governor Walz.
Now, I'm going to give you sort of the bullets of what his campaign said about that. The campaign citing Walz claimed that he had not been drinking and driving. They attributed it.
Whoa! That's a lie! Whoa!
As president, I will take on the high costs that matter most to most Americans.
Created?
Like the cost of food.
Which has gone up under you guys.
We all know.
Lot. Timothy Walz is being shredded over his DUI lies. Even people in the media are calling him out on it, saying, no, it wasn't a hearing problem. Dude was going very fast while very intoxicated. James Comer is also sending a letter to the FBI asking for answers about Walz's connection to China. You can see this letter came from Comer. He's drafting this one from the Committee on the Oversight and Accountability. Comer from Kentucky sent this one to the Honorable Christopher Wray, August 16th, signed by Comer himself, Chairman, Oversight and Accountability Committee. He says, all right, listen, we got to know a little bit more about Tim Walz, this CCP dude. He says, the Committee on Oversight and Accountability is conducting a government-wide investigation into the CCP, all right? First of all, they've got political warfare operations against America. We want to know how federal agencies are responding. And speaking of CCP people, Kamala recently announced her running mate, Timothy Walz, the current governor of Minnesota. And as part of the committee's government-wide investigation, we and the FBI were briefed on April 22nd, 2024, and again on July 17. And during that time, FBI briefers told the committee that the Bureau's Foreign Influence Task Force investigates the exact kind of activity that has come to light about Governor Walz. Now, the committee is seeking information about the Chinese entities and officials Governor Walz has engaged and partnered with, and we want to know about any warnings or advice the FBI may have given to Walz and about U.S. political figures being targeted or recruited by CCP. Now, it has come to the committee's attention, FBI, that Governor Walz has long-standing connections to CCP-connected entities and officials that make him susceptible to the party's strategy of elite capture, which seeks to co-opt influential figures in elite political, cultural, and academic circles to influence the U.S. to benefit the communist regime and to the detriment of Americans. Now, reporting about Governor Walz's extensive engagement with the CCP officials and entities while serving in public office raises questions about possible influence from the CCP and his decision-making as governor, and should he be elected as the vice president. Now, recent reporting, writes Comer, reveals that Governor Walz has concerning ties to the PRC. In 1993, according to the Star-Herald, as a teacher, Mr. Walz organized a trip to the PRC for Alliance High School students, where costs were paid by the Chinese government. Now, in 1994, Mr. Walz set up a private company named Education Travel Adventures, which coordinated annual trips to the PRC until 2003. It was led by Mr. Walz himself. Now, the corporation was reportedly dissolved 4 days after he took congressional office. Interesting, according to business records, as you can see in the footnotes. Now, since his first trip to China, Governor Walz has visited the PRC 30 times. In its investigation, the committee has highlighted the importance of U.S. officials being cognizant of CCP political and psychological warfare and efforts that seek to undermine and threaten national security. Now, while serving in Congress, Walz also served as a fellow at the Macau Polytechnic University while in Congress, a Chinese institution that characterizes itself as having a long-held devotion to and love for the motherland, just like good communists do. At the time he disclosed serving as a Macau fellow, Mr. Walz also had significant credit card debt. Oh, financial disclosure statement. Oh, isn't that curious? In 2019, Governor Walz headlined the 27th National Convention for the U.S.-China People's Friendly Association in the state of Minnesota. He also spoke alongside the president of the China's People Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. Man, they have long names too. Gosh, why do all bureaucrats and communists do this? Long titles. A year later, the Department of State exposed as a Beijing-based organization tasked with co-opting subnational governments. That's nice. So he was hanging out. Association of Friendship with Foreign Countries, which means we're going to co-opt and take you over into our dictatorship, including efforts to directly and malignly influence state and local leaders to promote the PRC's global agenda. That's nice. So Governor Walz has admitted that he does not fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship. Despite bipartisan efforts to identify and defeat CCP unrestricted warfare against America, Governor Walz continues problematic engagement with entities and individuals. In fact, in March 2020, 2024, not that long ago. He met with Consul General Zhao Jian to discuss China-U.S. relations and subnational cooperation. Now, despite his knowledge and condemnation of Communist China's human rights violations, Governor Walz says he applauds the accomplishments of the Chinese people and recognizes that some in the Chinese government advocate for greater rule of law. Now, to assist with the committee's investigation into the CCP infiltration and influence operations and the response from federal agencies, here's what we want. All documents and comms in the FBI's possessions, including that of foreign influence task forces regarding any Chinese individual or entity with whom Walz may have engaged or partnered. So we want to know about all these. Chinese People's Association of Friendship with Foreign Countries, which is, not about friendship at all. It's just like how the Patriot Act is about patriotism and how the Inflation Reduction Act is about reducing inflation. Chinese Students and Scholars Associations, Confucius Institutes, Consul General Zhao Jian, Embassy from the PRC, the Macau Polytechnic University, the Ministry of Public Security, Ministry of State Security, man, a lot of Chinese ties, National Association for China's Peaceful Unification, the PRC consulates in the U.S., the United Front, including the United Front Work Department, U.S.-China People's Friendship Association, and the U.S.-China Heartland Association. We want all documents between Walz and anything pertaining to warnings or guidance you may have given him. Here are the instructions for how you can get us these materials. Please send them over to our office. We're Congress. We can investigate any matter at any time, and we're doing that now. Thanks for your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, your friend, James Comer. All right, so that went over to Walz, and it seems to make sense now. Kamala's father was a communist. This guy loves the communists, and Kamala's a communist. She's got price communism coming down and more. So we'll continue to monitor it, but Tim Walz is also under a lot of other scrutiny. This was CNN, clipped for us over from our friend Johnny Maga on X, says that Timothy Walz got fact-checked about his DUI, and then we listened to him and come out and say, well, it was a hearing. His campaign said it was a hearing loss and all this stuff, and no, that's not true at all. So here's a fact check from CNN. What's going on here?
DUI arrest. This is a story about someone getting a DUI arrest and then his campaign repeatedly misleading and giving false statements to the public about it. So let's just go to the facts of that 1995 arrest first, okay? Walz was speeding over 95 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. He failed a field sobriety test that was administered by a state trooper. He then admitted in court that he had been drinking. He was transported to a local hospital for a blood test that showed he had a blood alcohol level of 0.128, and that was above the state legal limit. He then took a plea deal where he pled guilty to a reckless driving charge. Now, those are the facts. That's from police records, that's from court records, and that all is completely undisputed.
All right, so that is clear, the idea of what happened. What did his congressional campaign actually say happened?
So let's fast forward to 2006. He's in a tight congressional race. He is running for Congress. This was a Republican-held district that he was trying to flip, and then a local Republican blog puts up that he had this arrest for drunk driving. Now, I'm going to give you sort of the bullets of what his campaign said about that. The campaign citing Walz claimed that he had not been drinking and driving. They attributed his
Whoa! That's a lie. Oh, whoa.
His failed field sobriety test to hearing loss from his time in the National Guard, not alcohol. The campaign falsely said that he drove himself to the station, that he was allowed to drive home. They said the DUI charges were dropped because they were unfounded, and the campaign even faulted this trooper for saying that he didn't realize that Walz had hearing impairment.
Wild.
They claimed a judge actually chastised the state trooper for it. Now take a look at just one statement that his campaign put out. They said he couldn't understand what the trooper was telling him during the field sobriety test, and the trooper refused to speak up. The DUI charges were dropped for a reason. The judge would not have dismissed them if there were anything to him. Tim drove to the station that night and drove home afterwards. I don't think the trooper would have allowed that if there had been a problem. So none of what they said in that 2006 race was true at all, as we saw in just looking at those details of the 1995 arrest.
Yeah, so they lied massively in the first campaign, and he still won. So that was on CNN, which was very curious. They also brought this guy out too. So Ian Miles Chung is the one who clipped this for us, and he is explaining that this happened. Michael Smerconish, political commentator, was on here also talking about this DUI. Very interesting.
Walz spoke sloppily, should not have represented a role that he had as having been a permanent role when it wasn't. But the DUI story is indefensible. Casey, you and I know a thing or two about congressional campaigns. They're very small, they're very tight. There's usually like a paid campaign manager and a paid spokesperson, and that's it. So the idea that this came from his spokesperson and it didn't come from him, I don't buy it.
Totally.
And the idea that he tried to lay it off on a hearing disability from the National Guard service through the spokesperson while denying things that the K-file investigation proved to be inaccurate, I think is a real issue for him. In the end, it's going to be about the top of the ticket. But to me, the DUI is bigger than the stolen valor allegation, not because of the drinking, but because of the lie.
How do you think the Harris campaign should be dealing with this right now?
Full on. And it makes me wonder whether in the vetting process, maybe this is as a result of the expedited nature of her ascendancy as the candidate, but it makes me wonder how much they really knew about it. I'm sure they knew of the DWI, but it makes me wonder whether they were aware of all the underlying facts to the extent that the K-file is.
No, I don't think, well, maybe they were. I don't know, that they realized that the guy was probably as big of a liar as he is, and he just kind of fibs and, makes stuff up and allows people to think what they want to think. But it is a big issue. And the fact that he's laying on his National Guard stuff to say that that was a hearing problem when he was actually just drunk and speeding shows that it's a crack in the facade that means one portion will fall off and we'll start to see the other lies for what they are. Now, Kamala, the woman who picked that guy and thought he was amazing, she was out and very curious today. She was making all sorts of admissions about better economic times when Trump was in charge.
As president, I will take on the high costs that matter most to most Americans.
Created?
Like the cost of food.
Which has gone up under you guys
We all
a
know
lot.
that prices went up during the pandemic when the supply chains shut down and failed.
And when you signed that Inflation
But
Reduction
our
Act.
supply chains
That
have
vote.
now improved, and prices are still too high.
Yeah, but you're still spending. That's the problem.
A loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic. Ground beef is up almost 50%.
Thanks to you. So we saw that that is all true, and she's responsible for that. And so End Wokeness has created the shortest political ad of all time. Here's what that sounded
A
like.
loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic. Ground beef is up almost 50%.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Boom. That's it. 15 seconds. All you need. On repeat. That's Donald Trump. I approve this message. Absolutely outstanding. So that is what's happening with Walz and Kamala, and they're also saying that her little communist agenda is not good. Setting price caps has failed every time it's tried, and every country that's experimented with that has experienced catastrophe, and in some cases, 100 million dead. But here is CNN having a conversation about this.
Catherine, I read your piece, and I heard you just mention it. The federal ban on price gouging for groceries. You are skeptical of this. Why?
Well, first of all, nobody can explain what price gouging means. It's like that old line about pornography. I know it when I see it, in the sense that what does it mean to have an excessive price or an excessive profit
Whatever
margin?
Democrats
That seems to be shorthand for a price or a profit margin that bugs me. That seems too high. So, it's very hard to pin down what this would actually mean. If you look at the legislation, as I mentioned, is already in the Senate, led by Senate Warren and Senator Bob Casey and a slew of others. The particular way that this is written, which is likely to be the template for any proposal that Harris would eventually embrace, is especially bad in that it just bans grossly excessive prices, grossly excessive profit margins, and says that the Federal Trade Commission can use any metric it deems appropriate. What that would mean, which basically says, it's not going to be markets, it's not going to be supply and demand that's determining how much your grocery store charges you for milk or for eggs. It's going to be some bureaucrat in D.C., which seems like totally unworkable, first of all, for the FTC to be citing how much Kroger charges for eggs in Michigan. But it also would be very bad for markets. We've seen this kind of thing tried in lots of other countries before: Venezuela, Argentina, the Soviet Union, etc. It leads to shortages. It leads to black markets, plenty of uncertainty.
Right.
And beyond that, the specific way this bill is written might actually increase prices because of some of the other language in it. Things like requiring public companies to disclose in their quarterly reports, their quarterly earnings reports, how they're setting prices, which is a great way to help them collude, which normally we don't want them to do. So anyway, the devil's in the details, I guess, for that bill, but it's really hard for me to imagine any form of legislation that preserves the spirit of what she's proposing that would not be, at best, do nothing, at worst, cause a lot of harm.
Yeah, and starvation and shortages and black markets and all the things that good communists love because they want total control of the entire apparatus.